Welcome everyone to our webinar today. I'm so excited I'm really looking forward to this conversation and to sharing it with you. Our today's webinar is called Integrate Social Emotional Learning and Human Values with Coding and Robotics in Pre-K to 3 classrooms. I'm excited to be joined by my guest today. I'll be moderating an interview with Professor Marina Bers. Um, Dr. Bers is the director of the DevTech Research Group. She's also the chair of the Elliott Pearson School of Child Study and Human Development at Tufts University. She's a researcher and writer interested in bringing creative technology experiences into early childhood education. So we'll be talking today about her work generally, but in particular about her newest book, Beyond Coding, which looks at ways to explore education of sort of values, character, and self-expression within STEM experiences. I'm Jason Ennis. I'm the Director of Curriculum and Training at KinderLab Robotics. Dr. Bers is our Chief Scientist and co-founder of KinderLab Robotics as well. So our company exists thanks to the research and developments that Dr. Bers and her research team at the DevTech Group have done. So welcome, Dr. Bers. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
So I wanted to actually start with a brief poll just for a minute to get a sense from all of you what your roles in early childhood education are. So if you would just take a moment to click or tap on your screen to let us know, are you a classroom educator? Are you a specialist? Are you in administration? Maybe you're involved in out of school time or informal ed, or maybe you have a research interest and you're coming from a university or some other. So it looks like, yeah, we have a nice, strong representation of kind of active classroom teachers as well as specialists in library, media, and technology. So that's wonderful, and a number of researchers too. So thank you for sharing a little bit about who you are. And again, I appreciate you introducing yourselves in the attendee chat as well. So please go ahead and continue to do that if you've just joined us. Okay, I'll just share a tiny little bit about KinderLab Robotics for two reasons. One, because I'm excited to share about KIBO, which is the product that we make and support and share with teachers. But it's also KIBO and KinderLab are also the creations of my guest, Dr. Bers. So she's a researcher, but she's also responsible for securing an NSF grant to start a company, KinderLab Robotics, to make one of her creations, the KIBO robot, available to more teachers and students throughout the world. KIBO is a robot designed to introduce coding, engineering, computational thinking in early childhood. Ages 4 to 7 is really the focus. The children that KIBO was designed for, and it's developmentally appropriate for that group. KIBO introduces these concepts in an entirely screen-free way. So children use wooden blocks to program their robot. So the children assemble the robot by attaching parts, and then they create a program or sequence of instructions for the robot to follow by assembling a sequence of wooden blocks and then allowing the robot to read the barcodes on the blocks using a barcode scanner built into the robot. So everything from designing the program, teaching it to the robot, allowing the robot to read it, testing the program, all of these aspects of coding occur without the use of any app or computer or screens. We can then sort of develop this concept by connecting the sequencing that children do when they create programs to the idea of storytelling and the sequence of actions that a character takes in a story. So we can engage imagination play, creativity, self-expression by decorating the physical robot as a character or vehicle or animal within the story that the children are creating. We can engage children with a broad range of interests and focus really on the communicative aspect of coding experiences in the classroom. We're telling a story about, for example, the routines of a community member like a firefighter. We're honking our horn, we're flashing our siren red and white, and then we're driving forward into the town to help the people. So these ideas of decorating the robot and telling a story with the code allow us to focus on allowing children to express meaningful um, meaningful ideas that they want to share. So, this idea of sharing meaningful concepts is one of the unifying sort of principles behind the work that Dr. Bers and her labs have done over the years. Dr. Bers has been writing and publishing on these topics for more than 20 years. And her work, again, is embodied in the KIBO robot, ScratchJr, which is another wonderful kind of storytelling and creative coding product for early childhood. And it's also embodied in a number of really powerful educational frameworks, which we'll talk about today. One of the metaphors that Dr. Bers is well known for is this idea of treating coding as a playground, or rather using the metaphor of the playground to think about children's experiences when they're coding. So focusing on things like social engagement, creative play, open-ended experiences, and the opportunity to actually negotiate important social connections through these activities, just as we would on the playground. Dr. Bers's latest book extends some of these ideas and begins to really lay out a case that if we think about coding really as a way that children can communicate as another language, then we can explore concepts that go well beyond sort of traditional concepts of coding as a STEM skill. And we can get into important social emotional concepts. We can get into the idea of sharing things that are meaningful, both among kids within the same classroom, but also across larger distances, and really ways that we can use coding to promote sort of character development as well as connectedness among different people. So that's a sort of introduction to Dr. Bers's book. It's not published yet, but it's possible to pre-order. So there is a link there, and there'll be a link in the resources and the chat as well. If you're interested in sort of getting getting a copy of Beyond Coding as soon as possible, I'd encourage you to go to MIT Press's website. And that serves as our kind of introduction. I'll finally stop talking and let our guest of honor start to talk. So again, welcome, Dr. Bers. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And I really look forward to learning more about your recent work and the book. So I wanted to just start by asking you broadly, for folks who may really be thinking about coding as like something where people sit at terminals typing in commands to make computers do stuff, how is it that we can be talking about something like teaching values or character through coding and robotics? Can you help us kind of make that concrete?
Yeah. So hi everyone. Hi Jason. It's nice to see you again, and so nice to see people from all over the world. So keep introducing yourself. It gives me energy. It's nice. So actually, before I even respond to your question, I want to share that I have my first copy of the book that just
Great.
arrived. And just arrived, and it's going to be available for everyone starting on March 22nd. So it's coming up. It's really soon. Obviously, it's printed. So you wanted a story about one classroom experience combining values and robotics. The truth is, every time we work with robotics in a classroom, we are working with values. That's the hidden curriculum. So values are things that are important to us, the things that we value. And so if we are teachers and we're bringing robotics, it means that we value problem solving. And it means that we're valuing collaboration, because unless we have a robot per child, most of us will have children in groups working with robotics. It means that we value asking questions and going through a design process that invites creativity. So values are all the time, even in the decision to bring robotics into the classroom. Now, once we bring robotics into the classroom, There are different values that can be even contradictory with each other, but they all are at play. And what happens is usually we're not aware of them, they are hidden. So, for example, we might be on a rush to make sure that all children understand how to make a robot move forward quick. And some children might not understand that idea, and that's where values come in. So, as a teacher, do I privilege what's more important to me, that everyone understands, and therefore I use differentiated learning strategies? Or do I just have my own agenda, things that I need to teach, and I push forward even without leaving some kids behind? That's an example of how values come in. Then there is the obvious one, which is in how we distribute the materials. So robotics, and in particular KIBO, is a wonderful tool because it's tangible. So we don't need screens, we don't need keyboards. We have lots of wooden blocks that we use to program a robot to do things. Well, when we have lots of wooden blocks, it's really fun, but it's also hard logistically. You need, how do you go about setting up the materials and distributing the materials? And that's an important value decision from a teacher's perspective. Do I pre-create kits and assign to each group a kit that contains one forward, one back, two lights, and a record? Or do I put all of the materials in the room and I let children come and choose what they need when they need? If I go with the second one, it's more time consuming. However, you have the opportunity for children making wrong decisions, in the sense that you will have children that go and pick four motors and they grab the four motors. But the truth is they don't have slots for four motors. They only have slots for two or three. And so that invites a conversation with the children. Do you really need four? Can you do it with two? Because this other group was left with none of them. And although it might slow down the robotics class, it is a really good opportunity for having discussions about generosity and sharing. And those are values.
Mhm.
So I would say that it's not a particular story, but it's us being aware of how values play when we choose to bring any tools, and robotics in particular, into the classroom.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. You put it really powerfully with the idea of a hidden curriculum, that even as we're looking at, okay, we need to teach these particular computer science standards, or this is our objective is to get this project done within the 40-minute block. The fact is that helping the children sort of negotiate sharing these materials, helping them decide, how they're going to sort of respond to another child. Uh, Stealing their idea or sharing their ideas, you might say in engineering. Um, these become part of the curriculum of working with the robots. And I think in some of your earlier work, you've laid out um, a framework called positive technological development, and you've created what you've called the 6 C's that help teachers design educational experiences with things like robotics or coding uh, to maybe make some of that hidden curriculum more foregrounded. And I wonder if you might want to share a little bit about how you've evolved the ideas of the 6 C's on positive technological development to this new metaphor of kind of palettes of virtues that you explore in your book.
Yeah. So every time we use technology, we become active, right? So our goal with robotics or with programming languages for children to not be passive consumers, but active producers. And so if we are producing, we are engaging in behaviors.
Mhm.
And traditionally, we think of those behaviors as creating content, content creation, and creativity. So those are 2 C's that most of the time we think about, and they have to do with the cognitive realm. However, what I position in the PTD framework, which is a theoretical framework with some empirical validation, constructed over 2 decades of working with children and technology, is that our behaviors are not limited to creating content and using our creativity, but there are at least 6 positive behaviors that we can reinforce and promote in a coding playground. That means collaboration, communication, community building, choices of conduct, and of course content creation and creativity. Those are behaviors, those are things that we can do with technology. And if you notice, those behaviors happen in a regular playground, children collaborate and communicate and make choices, as well as in the coding playground. So our jobs as teachers is to set up a curriculum, activities, spaces, rules where those 6 C's can come to life. And behaviors are not the same thing as values. And that's where the palette of virtues comes in. And I talk about this extensively in my new book. You can collaborate, but not all collaborations are towards um, being generous, for example. You might collaborate to just undermine someone, right? You might not necessarily show gratitude to someone, although you are collaborating. So the metaphor of the palette of virtues is as follows. Painters, when people paint, they usually have a palette of colors, and those colors change according to what you want to paint and what where you are. So now it's about creativity, right? And it's about agency. I choose my colors, I mix and match, I paint, I have a creation. So now let's replace the colors with values, things that we care about. And that's where your palette of virtues comes about. So it's a palette that we invite teachers to make explicit, to say, in my classroom, in my coding playground, these are the values that I care about. And over 2 decades of work, I noticed that these are some of the values that I saw over and over being chosen and being developed in classrooms. What you see here: fairness, open mindedness, curiosity, perseverance, forgiveness, patience, and so forth. And so the invitation here is, as you go to teach robotics or programming or any kind of use of creative technology, what is your palette of virtues? What are the colors, the values that you choose to put in your palette and they choose to mix and match? And these palettes might be different depending on our context, on where are you teaching, to whom are we teaching, what's our goal. But what's important is to have it explicit. And once we have it explicit for ourselves, we can create activities and curriculum to reinforce some of these virtues. So the idea of how the PTD framework, it's a theoretical framework, palette of virtues is a metaphor. So it helps us operationalize the theoretical constructs, the theoretical behaviors into values, things that we care about.
Right. Yeah, that your point that we can create a classroom experience to encourage small group work, for example, but that doesn't automatically mean that the collaboration will be um, with an intention of kind of generosity or gratitude. So making those uh, the giving the teacher sort of a language to introduce that aspect of intentionality into these kind of formal structures in the classroom. That makes a lot of sense. So that these ideas of kind of merging values and the idea of kind of positive collaboration and self-expression um, seem to me to be kind of at the heart of one of the new kind of curricula that your research group has developed, and which I know you talk about at length in the book. But this idea of coding as another language, I think on its own, that's a profound concept. The idea that coding we can really think about as a form of literacy, a form of a tool that we can give children to encourage self-expression. And of course, once we give children this ability to communicate, then we've given them that environment where we can talk about values and the impact of what they share,
Yeah,
what it
so
has on others.
the idea here of coding as another language, and I invite all of you to go visit our website. We have coding as another language. It's a curriculum. It's both for ScratchJr and for KIBO. For KIBO, we have it for pre-K, kindergarten, first and second grade, and it's 24 lessons, and it's all free and available. It includes songs and movements. But the fundamental idea behind this is that traditionally we associate coding as STEM: science, technology, engineering, and math. And some of us say, oh, STEM is too limited. Let's talk about STEAM, and we introduce the arts. Well,
Mhm.
I'm saying STEM or STEAM, it's still limited because because coding really is learning a new language, a new system of representing ideas, a new alphabet, a new grammar. And once I have the ability to use this alphabet and this grammar, then I can express myself. And that's the goal of literacy, to find a written way of expression. And that's the way of coding. Once I express myself, I can share with others. So, in a lot of this work, we've been doing tons of work all over with coding as another language. We are mixing uh, the powerful ideas from literacy with powerful ideas from computer science. For example, the notion of representation. You have letters that represent words, but we have, for example, in KIBO, you have blocks that represent actions. The notion of an algorithm, which is a sequence of steps that get repeated, it's also very present when we tell stories. There is a sequence of events and so forth. And so the curriculum does a very good job at, I think, does a very good job at marking the differences. But something even more important, if we think of literacy, coding as another language means that we are giving children the ability to acquire a literacy of the 21st century. So we don't want to replace alphabetical literacy. We want to teach coding with this new literacy. So the whole curriculum is aligned to support both, and we work around 2 books. Usually in every class there's 2 books. One is a book about usually a woman in computer science, and that reinforces diversity. And children had to create a story with KIBO around the life of this woman. And then the second book is a fantasy book where children have to recreate the story with KIBO. What's important here is if we believe that coding is something that we should all know, and not only those who are going to become engineers and software developers, then it's something we need to start early on. We start in early childhood to teach reading and writing. And why not should we start teaching coding? There are a lot of parallel ideas that can reinforce each other. So here's
Absolutely.
an example, for example, about the writing process and the engineering process. So we talk about powerful ideas, and the idea of a design process is a very powerful idea where you ask a question, you imagine a solution, you plan for it, you create a prototype, you test and improve your prototype, and we share with others. Well, that design process, and it's an infinite loop, has a lot of similarities with the process of writing, where we have some ideas, we pre-run, we plan, we create a draft, we revise, we edit, and we publish. And then once we publish, we get new questions and so forth. And so the process of creativity is very similar. And at the end of the day, we want children that can engage in critical thinking, and children that know how to edit and revise their work, problem solve with words, problem solve with coding.
Um, yeah, that makes sense. And it's interesting to connect some of those. You've talked about the powerful ideas of computational thinking as well, which uh, ideas of engaging with the design process, of debugging, making parallels between what seem like kind of technical skills and these writing skills that we're used to incorporating into early childhood. I think it's a way to help make coding more accessible too to a teacher who's familiar with um, teaching literacy but may not think of themselves as a coding teacher. So, can you share a little bit about the ideas embodied in coding as another language? Can you talk a little bit about what it means to think of coding more as a literacy rather than a STEM skill? I mean, most people, I think, would think of computers and technology and coding, or of those sorts of experiences first when they think of coding. But what happens when we center literacy rather than STEM?
So here's the thing. When we teach language arts, right, we
Mm.
don't assume it's just for the literature class, right? We learn how to read and write, and we apply that reading and writing to every single class, to math, to history, to chemistry, to physics, to gym, to anything we do. And the same it's becoming, and it will become with coding. So if we limit coding to the STEM disciplines, we are not helping children, because nowadays, as children use the internet, as children are presented with social media, and as they grow old, right, and they will grow old, uh, there is a need to learn about what an algorithm is and about bias algorithms. How am I going to understand bias in artificial intelligence if I don't understand how an algorithm works? And so um, that means literacy. That means understanding how the world works around me,
Mhm.
and not just limited to a STEM classroom. It's something that we can use for everyday life and for any discipline in our lives.
What that makes sense. I'm thinking of coding as in terms of what children can do with this skill. I think that's one of the things I respond to in what you're saying. It's in the same way that you've pointed out that we teach all children to read and write, not because we expect them all to become either a journalist or a novelist, but because giving children these tools gives everyone more options to kind of communicate, to appreciate our culture, to connect, and that thinking of coding the same way is sort of empowering children in the same way. Um, and I wonder if you, one of the themes that I think has come up in sort of STEM education, also coding education, is this notion of computational thinking, which uh, encourages teachers to think about like the habits of mind and thought processes and kind of related skills that we're developing for children. But is there how do you feel like these concepts of computational thinking fit in when we look at coding through the lens of literacy or even of moral development?
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand the difference between computational thinking and coding.
Mm,
So coding is like learning how to use a language and using its grammar and its syntax. In KIBO will be which blocks come where and what I need to do. I need a begin, I need an end, and I need certain order, right? And once I understand the syntax and the grammar of a language, I can then learn another language. For example, in ScratchJr, I can have another language. I can be bilingual or trilingual, but I understood because I know the specifics of a particular language. But once I'm literate, I understand the big concepts behind the language. So it's the same here for computational thinking and coding. Computational thinking has to do with thought processes.
mm,
And I talk in my work about powerful ideas. Powerful ideas is a term that was coined by my mentor, Seymour Papert, the father of, Logo and programming languages for young children back in the 70s and 80s. And I refer to 7 powerful ideas of computational thinking. So these are ideas that are key to computer science, but relate to any other discipline: algorithm, modularity, control structures, representation, hardware, software, design process, debugging. We talked before about the design process, how the notion of a design process applies for reading and writing, and for coding. Algorithms, we talk about is sequencing, control structures. If then, it also applies to storytelling, debugging, problem solving, representation. So I think it's very important that when we teach computer science, we should not just be limited, or robotics, to learning the particular syntax and grammar of a language, but to really understand the deeper concept, the deeper ideas that are associated, because it's those ideas that will help us innovate, and are those ideas that will help us make connections between different disciplines. And that's where literacy is achieved, right?
mhm.
It's the connections.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I that's certainly something that has influenced a lot of the uh, curriculum for KIBO and for Scratch Junior. I know is that idea of sort of integrating and letting children use coding and these creative experiences to engage with other subjects within sort of the topics that they're learning. And we'll close actually with an opportunity to hear about some of the activities or experiences that you've facilitated sort of through the development of the book. But I wonder, before we get to those examples, or maybe as a lead into those examples, I wonder if you'd share a little bit about, this idea of social emotional learning is really a very broad label, and everything you've been talking about encouraging positive, using the palette of values to kind of inform the classroom experiences are all about social emotional learning. But I wonder if you'd sort of address that topic, like
Yeah.
as we think about coding and robotics, how can we also focus on SEL?
Right. So when we are engaged in robotics, we are in our particular approach to robotics, which is not everyone's approach, but our approach, which is making a project you care about. If you make a project that you care about, it's gonna be fun, but you're gonna be personally attached to your project. You're gonna wanna work. And if you want your project to work, it's very likely that you're gonna have to spend time with it because it will not work the first time, and therefore and you're going to have a lot of time. You're going to have to plan your time and allocate your time. Maybe if you're a kid, you're going to notice you're running out. You're not going to plan ahead, but you're going to have to make little adjustments, and you have a choice. Do you make a tantrum and throw everything in the air, or you breathe and understand that things are not working and you have to try again and again and again? And so what we call executive function, right? The idea of focus, the idea of organizing ourselves, and also what we talk about persistence, not giving up, learning how to manage our emotions, manage frustrations. The coding classroom is a wonderful opportunity because all of those things show up. And so, as teachers, we have an opportunity to pretend nothing happened, right? Or to really acknowledge, yes, when I work with robotics and when I code, uh, there might be a lot of frustration. How do I help my children in my classroom deal with frustration? This is an opportunity for social emotional learning. And that's why it's really important how we conceive and what is our palette of virtues. If our palette of virtues says efficiency, that means finishing up what I set myself to do really, really quickly, then there's not a lot of time for all the other palette of virtues. But if
Mhm.
my palette of virtues is, for example, patience, I will have the time to deal with all of those feelings that happen when things do not work the way I want. And so, for
That
example, the idea of roles and collaborations, it's an interesting case because uh, children work in teams. And how do you decide who does what? And do you rotate? Do you all collaborate? What does it mean to collaborate when you're 5 or 6 year olds? It's something that doesn't come naturally. So I know, for example, in KIBO, we created uh, different roles naturally because you have the person that can check the coder that can put together the blocks. And the blocks are, if you know KIBO, you see that they are all labeled in the four sides. So all children in a team will be able to see the same block. You have the person that checks the little light to see if it's scanning correctly. You have the builder, the person that puts together different modules. And so we can create collaborative environments in a classroom, but also some technologies lend themselves more for collaboration than others.
mhm.
Um, and teamwork, especially with this age group, it doesn't just happen automatically. It happens because we set up certain classroom environment to reinforce certain ideas around collaboration.
Absolutely. That again, your sort of point about the hidden curriculum comes to the fore. I mean, I remember one of the stories that you shared about uh, a classroom experience where the children were invited to sort of take parts for their KIBO kit from the shared pool that you were describing earlier, and the idea that children may at first take too many parts, and then that serves as a prompt to ask children to reflect on whether they need all of these motors that they took and to share them with other groups. And in fact, the vignette in your book where the teacher who was engaged in that story had actually set that up intentionally in order to create an opportunity to speak to the children about how to manage kind of shared resources like a pool of Kibo blocks, taking the time to make that social emotional learning explicit, even if it costs a little bit of kind of direct instruction time on coding skills, is actually, um, you know, critically important. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. So maybe to kind of bring these threads together, I wonder if you'd be interested in sharing a little bit about some of the experiences and projects that you and your team kind of facilitated and experienced while you were developing this framework. And to sort of frame it, I'll share that one of the metaphors, you've talked about coding as a playground and coding as another language. One of the other powerful metaphors that Dr. Bear shares in the new book is this idea of coding as a bridge, which really looks to how does our work as teachers and even as students create meaningful bridges to other communities, to other parts of the world. How does what we do affect others? So I wonder if you'd like to sort of share with an example there.
Yeah. So if we understand coding as a language, that positions us in the world of relationships because languages are about relationship building. And with languages, I can create bridges or I can create walls, right? So I go for the good. And I think that, coding as a language can help us develop this universal language that we help children create together. And even though they might not speak actually the same language, they might language in terms of values, in terms of actual language, in terms of culture, in terms of religions, in terms of in terms of race, in terms of you call it. They by trying to create, by engaging in an activity together, of building something together, this can serve as a bridge. So coding the idea as a bridge for differences, not necessarily by talking, by using an abstract language, but by using a very concrete language. So let me tell you a couple of examples. For the last several years, we've been working with schools both in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where I'm originally from, and in Boston. We've worked with kindergarten classrooms in Jewish, Muslim, and Catholic, and secular settings. And all of these teachers were trained with KIBO robotics, were given the curriculum, and they came together for professional development. And although they were coming from very, very different places, and with a lot of stereotypes and misconceptions about who the other one is, together they learned together how to code and how to bring coding to their children. And at the end of this wonderful experience, we had them getting to know a little bit more about who they were and how they were teaching, not because they came to a multi faith or an interfaith experience. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to learn coding. But through this shared activity, they left thinking, well, this is interesting. We're all human beings and we all encounter similar issues as we approach learning and teaching. And one really nice activity so this is a school in Argentina, that it's a Muslim school, and they have kids that come from different parts of the world that speak Arabic. And so the project that this kindergarten teacher created after being exposed to this interfaith robotics class was they had the kids go and interview their family members to see where did they come from all over the world, and then they programmed their kibos to travel all the way to Argentina. And what you see there writing is that we all are very different, but we're all learning together. And it was a beautiful project, and the parents invited, and they actually invited the Jewish school to come and see. And so it was very, very interesting how we can actually, then pandemic hit and we couldn't do it face to face. So it was a virtual event. But this was an interesting way where it wasn't just a bridge between the teachers, but it was a bridge between the children and their grandparents and their parents who had an opportunity to go and ask, where did we come from? And also between this particular school and other schools.
That's wonderful. What a great concrete sort of example of how we can use a program and a robot and these sort of decorations that the children made to really represent something meaningful to them, just as they would with, a poem or an artwork or a piece of writing. And the idea of putting coding right there in that same framework makes so much sense with a project like this. Um, well, we wanted to make sure to save some time for questions from the audience, and we've gotten a lot of sort of feedback in the chat about um, the what a great sort of framework this is, how interesting it is to think about coding in this light. I wanted to sort of uh, follow up on one question that folks were asking in the chat, which is kind of about the age groups and engaging very young children in activities like this. I mean, I think one of the things that's pretty unique about the DevTech Research Group and your work is taking some of these kind of constructionist ideas and really making them work with technology with very young children. So, can you address a little bit about that? What is it about um, developmentally appropriate tools in early childhood that pose kind of special challenges, and especially if we're trying to engage children even younger? We had one question asking about twos and threes. Can we
Yeah.
even start
Yeah.
to address these there?
Yeah, so all of my research is for children 4 and up.
Mm,
So why? Because I that's the time when we start getting into learning how to read and write
mm,
and symbolic systems of representation. And so that's the particular age I'm very interested, and I've done a lot of work. There are So younger than that, I would say the powerful ideas are more cause and effect, and I would say pre-coding or pre-computational thinking, kind of building the basics. I do this, something else happens. Um, but I think and playing with the materials.
mhm,
But I would say playing with the materials, cause and effect, maybe some basic sequencing in terms of three, these, a sequence of three events, but no more than that.
mhm, mhm. That makes sense. Um, with How about the question of sort of engaging with some of these concepts in throughout the kind of pandemic? Were there any experiences you had? You mentioned that that kind of limited what you could do with some of the Beyond STEM, but do you have any examples or advice for teachers who are maybe engaging in remote teaching?
Well, we've done lots of work over the pandemic with ScratchJr,
Mm-hmm.
tons of
Mm-hmm.
work because it's a tablet. With KIBO, we've done some work actually with Head Start programs in Missouri. We're working with 8 centers there, and those kids are young fours. And I think what's nice about KIBO in particular is that it's tangible, and we all know how hard it is to work with screens for a really long period of time with younger kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what we're gonna be seeing right now as COVID-19 is receding a little bit, I think we're gonna be seeing more and more uses of tangible tools and getting together face to face. And so yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, we're all thankful for that. The being able to engage with these physical tools more is going to be a great benefit for the younger kids. With the Head Start program that you mentioned, we actually had some other questions about sort of how we can get started, or for a teacher who's used to or who may not be like a robotics or coding teacher, but is experienced with like preschool or pre-K. Um, do you have advice on how they can get kind of comfortable starting to teach some of these concepts?
Yeah, I think the first thing will be play with the materials yourself. Set up your own coding playground. In particular, Kibo is designed for 4-year-olds, and so if a 4-year-old can understand, you can understand. It's about the blocks are designed to fit into each other, and you don't need a computer. You just scan the blocks. I would say familiarize yourself, play with colors, play with the blocks. You will see that the
Mhm,
colors are organized there are blue blocks that are movement, there are yellow blocks that are light. And so just pretend to be a kid and play, and don't follow step-by-step instructions. Just read how do you start and how do you scan, and that's it. And then create your sequence, bring your art materials, create a project that you really care about, make a ballerina, create a keyboard that can dance to your favorite music. And after you do that, you'll start feeling more comfortable. You don't have to be an expert to bring it to your classroom. Children will learn much faster than you do. Doesn't matter how old they are. They're not afraid to make mistakes. They're not afraid to try things out that we as adults are. So I would say get yourself a little bit familiar. You don't have to be an expert, and bring it to the classroom and model to children what it is to learn together. So you can model, I don't know how this works. Can you help me figure it out? And this idea of learning things together, trying things together, being persistent together, being generous together, this is where your palette of virtues can come in full fledged. And you'll take it from there.
Mhm. That's a great point about being open as a teacher to uncertainty, or taking the position of figuring out some of these tools alongside the children. That's a great lesson and something we can model for the students as well. You had mentioned in the context of the coding as another language curriculum, which people have been curious about in the Q&A as well. And I just wanted to let folks know that we'll be sharing a link to download that curriculum. It is freely available from Dr. Bers's research group's website. But in the context of that, you had mentioned that there are books that are kind of central to the progression through the curriculum, and that some of the concrete examples of activities are kind of retelling or recreating scenes from a story. I think that's a great example for teachers who are used to kind of literacy and storytelling, but not coding. Would you mind sharing a little bit about how one of those sort of book connected activities work within the curriculum?
Yeah. So, for example, one of our books is Where the Wild Things Are,
Mm,
which is a little kid that goes on a trip and on a boat and arrives to an island, and there are monsters that dance. And so we read the book, we retell the story of the book. It's a beautiful book. And then at the end, children are invited to program their own keyboard robots to do their own wild dances.
mm,
And not just to program, but to decorate them. And how do they, to make their own creative monsters. And then every child shows their monsters, and we have a dance party for monsters, where usually what you see is that children dance along with the robot, right? And so that's one way to to incorporate this. I actually, Jason, I'm seeing in the chat that some people were asking about children learning with dyslexia, or
Yep.
children that. So we have not done any work with dyslexia and kids with dyslexia. We are constantly asked about that, and I think it's fascinating. We just did not have the time or the resources, or basically the time to look into that. I think it would be really fantastic. My instinct is that children with dyslexia will be able to actually code and use, especially without a problem, because dyslexia
Mm,
is at a much finer level than the ideas that these blocks represent,
mm,
right? When you code with keyboard, with ScratchJr, you are coding motion actions. So go forward, go backwards. So they will be able to express that. And I wonder how this will translate. It's a fascinating research question we have not explored. What we did is we did a lot of work with KIBO and children with the autism spectrum disorder.
mhm,
We published a couple of papers done in Panama, and it was fantastic. Children were really able to, very severe autism, were able that were not verbal, were able to program the robots, and it was a very fantastic experience. If anyone is interested, I recommend the paper in my. It's linked for
mhm.
free. Yeah.
Great, great. Yeah, that's just speaking as uh, KinderLab as well. We've gotten a lot of questions from teachers who are interested in using KIBO in all sorts of different contexts with children on the autism spectrum, or with other special needs. And KIBO in particular, because it is so concrete and tangible and responds in such a sort of predictable way, is it seems very well suited to kind of enhancing education for all students. But I understand that that's sort of a growing research area for you and your team. Um, so that seems to be it for the questions that have been posed by the audience. I know that sharing um, kind of really specific, concrete examples is often really helpful for teachers like this, and or for teachers thinking about using tools like this. So
So
the example that you shared about the book, The Wild Thing integration is wonderful. Do you have maybe one more kind of
yeah,
beyond STEM
yeah,
experience to
actually,
share?
I wanted to invite all of you. If you go to my DevTech website, we have
Mhm,
lots of videos. I would say we have over 100 videos of classroom experiences done where we show the integration of KIBO with literacy, integration of KIBO with math, integration with dances around the world. So it's my DevTech website. You can
mhm,
Google my name, Marina Bers, and you'll see there. And there are usually 3-minute videos. You also can see a full video about the experience in Argentina and the experience in Boston with this multi-faith project. And I think that it's better to see than for me to tell
mhm.
you about this.
Definitely. Yeah,
So
those are wonderful videos, and I'm sorry I didn't put the link to the DevTech website actually right on this, but like you mentioned, the we can provide that in the chat, and then also I think from the Coding as Another Language curriculum website, it may be possible to link over to some of those videos. But I know that Christina,
yeah,
who's also here from KinderLab, put it in the chat.
yeah, so I think it's a we have we have curriculum at DevTech. KinderLab has its own curriculum that it's all similar, the same
Hmm.
spirit that you build by doing. So I really invite people to explore. If you don't have time for doing a full curriculum, I know someone in the chat I just saw posted, "What about day one?" I would say day one, play with the materials, get to know KIBO, and create a little dance. So usually our day one is choose a song you like and program your keyboard to dance to the rhythm of that song. And and then just explore and
Excellent.
and use art materials as well. So don't think as coding limited to just what comes on the box. You code the same way that you use language with your gestures and with hands. It's not just what comes out. Think of coding with the materials around you.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, with something like Kibo that is so concrete, sometimes I tell teachers that day one, we don't even really need to talk about what is a program or how do we code. We could just spend the day building decorations onto the robot, or we can spend a day engaging with the blocks and see what it's like to sort of connect the blocks and build them. So there's so
Yeah.
many concepts to engage with that it can be important, like you say, to kind of take the time to
Yeah.
approach it
And something
slowly.
else that I think in the book, so in Beyond Coding, I
Mhm,
wrote it as a not as an academic book, but really as a conversation. And the book has a lot of my own personal stories as well of me learning. And I just want to end with this because I think it will show you one of the stories is I was in Argentina and I told my dad, I won a scholarship. I'm going to go study at get my PhD at MIT in the US. This is a dream. They're going to pay for everything. And my dad said, but MIT, you don't like technology, you don't like computers. How why are you going there? And I think, and for me the response was, I'm going there because I like how to write. I love writing. I used to be a journalist before. And he says, and what's the connection between writing and computer science? And we're talking about 1994. And I said, well, because you can create worlds with that. You can create meaning. And so I think that's really what I wanted to end with, that coding, it is really a language that allows us to create worlds, to create meaning, and to relate to people in different ways. And beyond coding really invites us to do that, to just see beyond the activity of coding when we are creating this world, what kind of relationships are we including in our world? And so that's the invitation I invite for all of you. Create your own palette of virtues and see how you can translate that into your own classroom.
So wonderful. What an important way to frame this work. So thank you so much, Dr. Bers, for sharing all this with us. I will mention this, the links that are here are available now or through the chat. There's a number of resources that we've shared that are curriculum, activities, white papers from KinderLab as well. And before we shut down the recording, we will play a brief video from KinderLab that's just a couple of minutes long that kind of demonstrates how it looks to sort of run a KIBO, how KIBO operates, and are also framed with some of Dr. Bers's thinking. But before we launch into that video, I just wanted to say thank you again to all of you for joining us today, and thank you very much to Dr. Bers for sharing all of this perspective and insight and really wonderful way of framing coding in the classroom. So thank you, Dr. Bers. And we will play a short video now for you folks, and then we'll sign off.
Meet KIBO, the screen-free STEAM robot kit for young learners. KIBO is a screen-free programmable robot kit that introduces coding and sequencing to children ages 4 to 7. Based on 20 years of research, KIBO lets kids build and construct, code, and decorate their own robot. KIBO introduces coding by giving students a way to program their robot with wooden programming blocks. They arrange the blocks in a sequence, scan their sequence with KIBO's built-in barcode scanner, press the Go button, and the robot comes alive. Dr. Marina Bers, co-founder and chief scientist for KinderLab Robotics, describes the importance of introducing coding and robotics to young learners.
We think of coding as a literacy, and that means you want to understand how the world works. Just like reading and writing, think of that for a second. So reading and writing is not just so you can become a professional journalist or a novelist. Some of us will, but most of us will not. The same is true for coding. Some of us will become software engineers or programmers, but most of us will not. And we want to learn how to code anyway, so you can manipulate and understand what's going on around us, so we can really think in abstract, problem-solving, creative ways.
Using the art platforms, KIBO can become anything a child can imagine. It can become a bowling ball, a car, a migrating gray whale, a very hungry caterpillar, a cultural dancer, an artist, a cave explorer, even a building brick masterpiece. And KIBO offers over 160 hours of curriculum aligned to current computer science standards. Imagine the possibilities. With KIBO, children get hands-on experience with the engineering design process by exploring sequencing, programming, cause and effect, troubleshooting, problem solving, and collaboration. Bring your lessons and activities to life in an engaging, interactive, and fun way with KIBO. Join the thousands of students enjoying their STEAM learning through creative play. For more information about KinderLab Robotics and KIBO, go to kinderlabrobotics.com or send an email to info@kinderlabrobotics.com. Build, art, code, play.
So that's a bit of our sort of sponsor message to
I
close
love
things
it.
out.
It's
Right,
great.
thank you.
Yeah.
So that's some of the themes that Dr. Bers touched on today are like encapsulated in the KIBO robot. So we invite you to come check out the KinderLab website, but also check out what's going on at DevTech. Dr. Bers's book will be coming out next week. It sounded like 2 weeks, 10 days, very soon. So please do order that. It is wonderful. It's, like Dr. Bers said, it's a conversation. It's very personal, and it really frames the work that we're doing as coding educators in a really wonderful wide context. So again, thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Bers, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Jason. Good to see everyone. Bye.
Hey, good to see all of you. Take care.